What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content that I'm uploading onto my channel, then feel free to subscribe, and you can also offer suggestions on topics and characters and storylines and whatnot that we can have discussions on later on in this channel. Alright, members of the Rob Corps, I'll be honest with you guys. There was a time when you couldn't pay me to read a Wonder Woman story. I mean, it was just like, I'm never gonna read Wonder Woman. Like, she's a character I don't care about, like I know who she is, but I would never read her own individual stories. And it kind of shames me to say that. And the reason why is because Greg Rucka is freaking setting the world on fire with Wonder Woman right now. It is insane how good his writing is. Now, admittedly, I'm still kind of on the fence about this. I wasn't a fan of him taking two different story arcs and telling them at the same time. For those of you guys who don't know, with DC Rebirth, Wonder Woman is effectively a wholesale relaunch of her character. I mean, they're going through and they're tying in a lot of the New 52 stuff, like she still dated Superman, that kind of thing, or the New 52 Superman, but Wonder Woman Year One retells her origin story. Wonder Woman The Lies goes back and just retcons a shit ton of stuff. But it does it so well. That's why I say Greg Rucka is dude, this guy's a machine. I mean, it's insane how good he is with the story. So the cool thing about this is getting into this, we initially pick up with Wonder Woman on the search for a truth. And the reason why is because it's basically this idea that she cannot access Themyscira. She cannot access her homeland anymore. And this, oh my God. The ending of this is mind-blowing. Greg Rucka, if you ever see this video, I love you, man. Like, you are, dude. Here's the deal, guys. And I know I'm getting super fanboyish about this, but here's the deal. You ask anybody who reads comics, and those of you guys who are veteran comic book readers, like you'll probably agree to this. There are writers out there that we just trust. I mean, like Brian Michael Bendis will write a story. I may not like the story that he writes, but I will buy it and read it because it's Brian Michael Bendis, Jonathan Hickman, Jeff Johns, Robert Venditti. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on of the writers that will just read anything they create. With Greg Rucka, he wrote Shattered Empire, which was literally the immediate follow-up to the Return of the Jedi, and it was a beautifully crafted story. So I'll read pretty much anything that he writes here, and with this story, he really shows us just how good he is. And so this is largely just Wonder Woman trying to find her way back to Themyscira. At least the beginning seems to be that way. The kicker with this is that we also switch to a woman named Etta Candy. Now, Etta Candy is not new. She's not a new creation by Greg Rucka, not by a long shot. She's been around for a long time in DC Comics. The funny thing about this, though, is that with DC Rebirth, they changed her up a little bit, and maybe it was New 52 that did that, but they made her African-American as opposed to when she was a white woman before. But she was always this kind of female counterpart to Steve Trevor, minus the romance. And so she was kind of like this friend that Wonder Woman had on the inside with regards to how she interacted with humanity. And so the two of them go really far back. But the notion here is that Etta Candy is very much following Steve Trevor. Now, one of the things, and this is why I was kind of hesitant to do this story, one of the things that this does, it doesn't really require that we know the events of Wonder Woman Year One, but it doesn't hurt to know them. The issue is that Wonder Woman Year One is not finished yet. That actually finishes, I think, in the first week of January, I believe, is when that story arc officially comes to a conclusion. And so it kind of puts us in a tough pickle here because there are things that I could kind of spoil, but I don't want to. I don't want to spoil those things. So we're going to make do with what we have. But this is essentially a scenario where Steve Trevor and Wonder Woman have not talked for quite some time. Now, this is why I say this story is kind of a retconning situation, because we know that with Darkseid War, for example, that Steve Trevor and Wonder Woman were interacting with one another. They were very, communicative. What seems to be indicated here is that Greg Rucka is going back and saying none of that happened. Now, that seems to be the overarching DC Rebirth theme, that like everything from DCU is just gone, that none of that ever happened. Jim Gordon never became Batman, Bruce Wayne never died, Bruce Wayne was never the god of knowledge, Superman was never the god of strength, none of that stuff happened. Instead, it's almost like DCU never existed, and we essentially just kind of pick up with the continuation of the New 52 before DCU ever started as an initiative for the DC Comics line. Now, that's not really a bad thing. There were some good things to come out of DCU. I personally liked Jim Gordon Batman, but the issue was that, the whole concept of, creativity over continuity really drove fans up the wall. And so it created a very confusing situation. And so it was really one of these situations where it was just kind of like, well, it's better to pretend it didn't exist as opposed to try to find some way to fit it into the continuity of DC's line up until this point following the New 52 relaunch. And so we just kind of have to take this at face value that Steve Trevor and Wonder Woman haven't spoken for some time. This is sort of a difficult thing to grasp. If you've been following DC's continuity up to this point, and it's one of these situations where I'm not really asking you guys to accept it as an absolute truth. I guess I'm just asking you guys understand what it is that DC's doing with his character at the moment. But the idea here is that the initial situation kind of jumps back and forth between Wonder Woman and Steve Trevor. This is actually a really cool concept that Greg Rucka is going with here, because while Wonder Woman is trying to locate some individual and we don't really know who it is, we also have Steve Trevor, who's in Africa as well. Now, the way that Etta Candy fits into all this is that she's following Wonder Woman. She's trying to figure out where it is that Wonder Woman's going. More so than that, Steve Trevor is on a mission with regards to the US government, or at least it seems to be for the US government in Africa itself, taking on a particular warlord that's essentially been kidnapping women from across the landscape in Africa. And so the idea seems to be a concern that Wonder Woman may stumble onto what it is that Steve Trevor's doing and essentially screw up the entirety of the mission. They don't really know what's going on because in a lot of ways, Wonder Woman is a wild card here. I mean, they can't really stop her, but they don't want her figuring out what's going on. At the very least, they, if she does get involved in the situation, they want to have some way to control it and some way to contain it. Now, with regards to Steve Trevor himself, of course, we learn that some warlord has been going through and taking these different daughters when we have Steve Trevor coming across a local village. And this guy in the village, I guess this elder basically says that some guy named Cadulo has been taking the young girls and whisking them away. And so it's really a scenario where they did what they could to fight him off and fight off his forces, but in the end, none of it really worked. Now, transitioning back to Wonder Woman again, we basically have her going against these weird, wolf guys and so on, and we learn the person that she's actually searching for is Barbara Ann Minerva, also known as Cheetah. Now, what happens with Cheetah as a character? In truth, and it kind of amazes me this is the case, in these 6 issues, this is some of the best damn storytelling for her character and character development that I've ever seen in the history of comic book writing. Now, again, I've not been the most avid Wonder Woman reader, and so I couldn't really tell you what her best stories are. But in terms of like modern sensibilities, in terms of right now with comic books and the stories that we're getting, the development that she's getting right now is mind-blowing. I mean, it's stellar what happens with her. Now, we of course have Wonder Woman basically communicating with Cheetah and saying, hey, look, I'm trying to find Themyscira. I need you to help me do it. Now, to cheat here a little bit, I know we said we wouldn't really delve too much into Wonder Woman Year One because I wanted to save that for a separate video, but to cheat here a little bit, because I know you guys love it when we do a little bit of cheating. I know you guys are not adverse to me cheating a little bit. So to cheat some here, it's basically the situation where Barbara Ann Minerva was essentially, really one of the first people that Wonder Woman met when she left Paradise Island. Well, I guess now when she left Themyscira. This is really Greg Rucka kind of paying testament to the history of Cheetah in the Wonder Woman comics, in the sense that Cheetah's had a long running history in Wonder Woman, the concept of Cheetah as a whole, despite the fact that Barbara Minerva is a relatively new creation, not super new, but new within the last like 30 years or so. And so she's about, reasonably new. But the idea here is that for Wonder Woman, because of the fact that Barbara Ann Minerva has been such an intrinsic part of her life, if anyone can help, Wonder Woman get back to Themyscira, it would be Barbara Ann Minerva. Now, it would also be Steve Trevor, but the idea seems to be that because the two of them aren't talking with one another, and because of the fact that they're simply not communicating, the initial goal of Wonder Woman is to go directly to Cheetah. Now, initially, there's some arguing back and forth. There's some debate back and forth. And what this does with Greg Rucka is he again goes back and he focuses heavily on the beginning stories, really the basis behind Cheetah in terms of how she fits in to the Wonder Woman mythos. Now, this is really, really important here. And the reason why I say that is because Cheetah is well known, but not a lot of people know a whole lot about her. Now, her entire existence really revolves around a guy, or I guess a being, known as Urzkartaga. I'm going to try to pronounce that as best I can because that's just one hell of a name to try to say consistently. To say it 5 times fast is nuts. But this is a long-standing part of her history. I mean, even in the origin stories, like the old school, the first appearances, the first time that Barbara Ann Minerva turned into Cheetah, this whole thing of Urzkartaga had been a long-running part. And so it's not like Greg Rucka is just making things up. It's not like he's just kind of fabricating this on the spot. He's drawing on the history of Cheetah. The difference here is that he's updating a lot of it. Now, initially, Cheetah is hesitant to help Wonder Woman, doesn't really want to have anything to do with her, but Wonder Woman touches and says, look, you're one of the longest friends that I've had. Yes, we've argued. Yes, we've fought. Yes, we've been mortal enemies at times, but when it all comes down to it, if you needed me, I would be there to help you. Now, this is very, very important because with Cheetah, she's largely been operating out there in the middle of no man's land for quite some time. And the reason why is because she's basically being tracked by these minions of Urzkartaga. Now, we don't learn exactly, how far this fits into the scenario until later on, but we also have Steve Trevor essentially taking up this mission to bring down Cadulo. Now, again, this really seems to be the overarching mission that he has. This seems to be the overarching purpose of him is to take this guy out, to bring him down. down at the request of his superiors. But as they make their way through these jungle territories, they suddenly come across these unnatural structures that have been made either artificially or at the very least nature itself has just kind of been manipulated in such a way that it creates these massive constructs of land masses and mountainous regions and so on and so forth. And so this is really Steve Trevor kind of sitting down and saying, okay guys, look, we're getting into some really messed up stuff. We're getting into some territory. We might not make it out alive from this situation. Now, again, with Steve Trevor as a character, this is one of the reasons why I've loved him historically, even outside of the Wonder Woman comics, or I guess he's really been largely confined, but as a concept, you know, as an idea, this is why I like Steve Trevor, because he's literally an average guy thrust into an impossible world. Because keep in mind, when it comes to the DC mythos, DC takes a very real world stance when it comes to gods and deities and so on. They're not like Marvel Comics. Marvel Comics says, well, the cosmic entities are just facets of the universe. They represent aspects of the universe. You know, the endless expansion of the universe, the amount of time it takes from the time the universe first comes into existence until it ends, the time between the collapse of the universe and the formation of another one, the celestials, so on and so forth, the Watchers. I mean, they have this huge, you know, complex ideology on how the universe works, but it's not really grounded in reality. The closest they get to that are like the Sky Fathers, you know, where you have Zeus and you have Odin and so on and so forth, and the gods of the real world is a singular pantheon, but they're not even at the top. With DC Comics, we have a lot of real world gods that get into this. We have the Presence, we have the Spectre, who's the judge of God, we have the Wrath of God, which is an actual entity, we have Lucifer Morningstar, who's a character. I mean, with Wonder Woman, she deals a lot with the earthly pantheon of gods, and so, you know, Zeus and Hera and so on and so forth, Greek mythology, it really works out in this really cool situation. And so Wonder Woman allows us to see this sort of Greek mythological, godly pantheon of DC Comics, as opposed to Superman, who's just kind of fighting these just wildly powerful beings like Darkseid and stuff like that. And so it's a really cool scenario in terms of how her comics work in relation to the rest of the continuity. Now, the other thing about this is that while Wonder Woman and Cheetah are making their way through this jungle, suddenly Cheetah begins to succumb to her bloodlust. Now, again, this is Greg Rucka going back and offering a few changes to the situation in terms of what it is that's going on with her character. We'll kind of get this grand poobah explanation later on, but for the moment, this is really him coming back and saying that Cheetah is essentially cursed to desire the flesh of men for all eternity, or at least for as long as she lives. She's confined to this role of, you know, being a cheetah more or less, and then killing any of those as she comes across to satisfy her own bloodlust. Now, Wonder Woman, and this is why I love Greg Rucka's writing so much. The Wonder Woman is kind of Cheetah's anchor to reality. She's a way that Cheetah's able to maintain her sanity without losing her mind entirely. Now, the question is, what has Cheetah kind of been doing while she's been running around this jungle? Has she just been succumbing to her bloodlust constantly? And the answer to that question seems to be yes, because Cheetah herself is remorseful of the fact that she does have this bloodlust. She's remorseful of the life that she lives and killing innocent people just because of the fact that she's cursed to be this way. And so switching over to Steve Trevor himself, we officially have him come upon the territory of Cadulo, where he and his guys have been taken prisoner. And this really seems to be a scenario where Cadulo and, you know, Urzkartaga are essentially individuals that exist for the purpose of trying to bring Urzkartaga back, or into the physical world is the best way to say it. Now, this is where we get into things that are pretty easy to understand, but it doesn't mean that it boggles the mind any less than it normally would. But before we jump into that, we actually pick up with the return of a girl named Sasha. Now, Sasha's had a long-running history in DC Comics as part of the Wonder Woman mythos, but really, she started out in Batman. She was actually created by Greg Rucka, and she started out in Detective Comics somewhere online. I don't remember the issue number. I want to say something like 700 or something along those lines, but I'm not going to swear to that as an absolute truth, but she was a Greg Rucka creation. And so to see him basically take a character that he originally introduced as part of the Batman mythos and roll her over into the new launch of Wonder Woman is actually really cool. The difference with this is that because, you know, she is a creation by him, he's really kind of given extra liberties here, and that's really how it is. Whenever a writer creates a character or a team of characters, or revamps a character or a team of characters in such a way that their writing becomes the status quo for the characters going forward, then they're allowed a little more leeway. Hence the reason why, after Chris Claremont wrote the X-Men for 17 years, when he came back in the early 2000s and wrote Extreme X-Men, Marvel was just kind of like, hey, Claremont, do whatever you want to do. It doesn't matter. I mean, you wrote the X-Men for 17 years. You're the reason people know them and they're popular. Write where you want to, man. I mean, who are we to get in your way? Now, of course, you know, Marvel ended up getting in his way and kind of screwed up the Extreme X-Men story arc in and of itself. But the idea here is that with Greg Rucka having created Sasha in the first place, he's basically allowed to do what he wants with her. Now, her meeting with Etta Candy is really the two of them sitting down and saying, okay, you know, at this point in time, because of the fact that Sasha's being reworked in the storyline, storyline, she's now a superior of Etta Candy, and Etta Candy wants to launch a rescue mission to basically rescue Steve Trevor because, again, he's gone off the grid. We know he's been taken by Cadulo, but he's essentially off the grid, and the idea is to find a way to go to his last known location, send in some kind of a Black Ops team, get him back, and then essentially just kind of question him, debrief him about everything that was going on. Now, initially, Sasha says, okay, look, it might be too early for that. Steve Trevor is extremely capable. We'll give it 12 more hours. If that doesn't work out, if it doesn't happen that way, then we'll go ahead and grab him. But the other half of this equation is Etta also says Wonder Woman is there somewhere. She's not necessarily with Steve Trevor, but she's in the general vicinity. And the two of them share this, this bond that transcends friendship, it transcends anything, and it's really the situation where one of them is in trouble, the other will respond. And so what Etta says is, okay, if we're gonna wait, then maybe Wonder Woman will step in. Maybe Wonder Woman will basically rescue Steve Trevor, then we can bring him back, debrief him, and make sure, see what's going on with this whole situation. And so because of that, it's really a scenario where we have Etta and Sasha just kind of buying their time, waiting to see what happens. And so transitioning back to Steve Trevor, again, it's very much this interrogation between Cadulo and Trevor. And it's really just Greg Rucka saying, hey guys, in case you forgot, here's what Steve Trevor's supposed to be like, because we've seen different iterations of him, but Steve Trevor as he exists right now is a badass. And I love what Greg Rucka's doing with his character. This is why I say, guys, Greg Rucka is setting the world on fire with Wonder Woman right now, because he's doing such an incredible job with the writing of the characters, with how they're depicted. I love the way these things are unfolding. I mean, with Steve Trevor, he's I wouldn't really say he's narcissistic, but he's kind of a dick. But it's funny and it works. It works in a way that complements his character. And so again, switching back to Wonder Woman, this is kind of a continuation of the discussion between Cheetah and Wonder Woman herself, in the sense that Cheetah views Wonder Woman as a friend, but also views her as an enemy, in the sense that, in the mind of Cheetah, Wonder Woman is the reason why Barbara became Cheetah in the first place. Now again, we'll focus a little more on that here in a little while, but Wonder Woman also looks to Cheetah and says, hey, look, nothing really seems right. Nothing feels like it's where it's supposed to be. Nothing feels in its place. It seems like everything's just kind of discombobulated. It seems like everything's wrong. It's like one of those scenarios where you have a word on the tip of your tongue, but you can't remember what it is. And that's really how Wonder Woman feels. Right now she's got an itch she can't scratch, and she's trying to figure out what it is that's going on in this situation that's keeping her from remembering where Themyscira is. And so at this point, we essentially have Etta and Sasha going their own separate ways, but then we also learn that Sasha's not who she claims to be, that instead, Sasha's actually, or at least it looks like, she's an android, and she's being controlled by some sort of artificial intelligence, and the idea is to effectively speed up some phase that involves Wonder Woman. Now, the issue with this is that this whole phase, this whole process concept of Wonder Woman in terms of, AIs controlling her, or at least manipulating her scenario from afar, doesn't look like it'll actually be wrapped up in this storyline, The Lies. It looks like it'll be wrapped up in a future storyline. But, switching back over to Steve Trevor, this is really just a scenario where he's continuing to be taunted by Cadulo, who's continuing to be made fun of. He's really just kind of giving him a hard time. But we also learn that with regards to the god Urzkartaga, that he has been in existence for quite some time, that he existed as more or less this plant god, and that he was constantly cared for and monitored by different women, that he would take them as brides, and that, he would basically point one of them to be his guardian, to be the absolute protector of him, so to speak. But, of course, with this scenario, we also have Wonder Woman showing up as well. And while she does manage to rescue a lot of Steve Trevor's friends, the question she has is, where is Steve Trevor? If you're here, Steve Trevor's got to be around here somewhere. Where is he at? And this is really her learning of the fact that Steve Trevor's been taken, and the idea is to effectively have the god Urzkartaga bring himself back in the form or in the body of one of his henchmen using the physical form of Steve Trevor. It seems a little strange here, but what Cheetah also does is she effectively gives us the story, or gives us this kind of updated origin of her character, at least why it is that she's a cheetah. And this is why I say this is really important, because this kind of goes back and changes a lot of things that we knew. For those of you guys who are new to comic books, the way that origin stories usually work is whatever the most recent origin story is taken as an absolute. With a character like the Joker, for example, we have more updated origins from the Killing Joke. The problem is a lot of those updated origins tie into the Killing Joke. And so the issue is the Killing Joke still canon? Because the Killing Joke was the most complete origin story of the Joker and everything else seems to reference it, people take that as the definitive origin, but also because it's so popular and a lot of people just don't want to believe the other ones. It's really whatever, people choose to go with. But for me as a comic book fan, I usually always go with the most recent and origin stories for individual characters. But with Cheetah, what we learn is that, you know, the god Urzkartaga had basically looked to all these different women that were around him, and they would all take care of him. There would also be one woman who was selected that would essentially be his wife, and this woman would be granted the powers of a cheetah. The problem with this was that those women that became his wife had to be virgins. They couldn't be in what Cheetah refers to as being sullied. But because of the fact that Cheetah was not a virgin when she was betrothed to Urzkartaga, and because the laws of the old way meant that once the marriage process began to unfold, that it couldn't be stopped, that with Urzkartaga more or less being bound to marrying Cheetah, he essentially just cursed her with a bloodlust, so that she'd be his bride more or less, but she would be doomed to travel the world, killing everybody that she came across or killing as many people as she could, and then eventually consuming her flesh. Now, this is Greg Rucka basically coming back and saying, this is why Cheetah did bad things. This is why Cheetah was a villain. Not because she wanted to be, but because she was cursed to be. Now, the cool thing about this is that it provides some great depth and some great insight into her. I mean, this is something DC had always toyed with for quite some time, right? I mean, this is something that they had done for a little while where it was always this sort of dramatic situation, but as far as I'm aware, this is the first time we've seen this in-depth of a character development for someone like Cheetah with regards to her just kind of being a tragic villain. And so, of course, you know, with this scenario, Wonder Woman shows up, and it's really more or less just her saving the day. I mean, it's her showing up, destroying the physical body of Urzkartaga and forcing him to go back into remission, and then just kind of tearing his body apart and destroying him piece by piece. And so Greg Rucka kind of wraps up this little segment pretty darn fast in terms of what happens with Wonder Woman's character and how it is that she functions in relation to, you know, a lot of the women in the world that look up to her. But the other half of this is she says not everything is what it seems. Let's say, for example, that you're sitting in a room and there is a person outside of your room and they provide you with food, they provide you with water to make sure that you stay alive. Now, the question is this: is the person outside of a room a caretaker, or are they a guard? Are you a prisoner, or are you someone who's being taken care of? Now, that's the way this scenario works, because what Greg Rucka had basically been saying up to this point is, well, you know, all these women who are here, you know, they were caretakers. You know, they made sure that Urzkartaga had the things that he needed. They made sure that he had a wife. They ensured that Urzkartaga was always able to be satiated in terms of his desire for whatever it is that he needed at the time. The problem with this is Wonder Woman says, this is not the case. You've all been lied. Somewhere along the line, Urzkartaga began manipulating all of you. You are not here as caretakers. You're here as guardians. You're here to make sure that Urzkartaga never comes back to the mortal plane of existence. You're effectively guards, and you're here to keep him prisoner. And so because of this, it's a chance for all these women to basically rally against Urzkartaga, and it's a chance for Cheetah to understand what her role is supposed to be, that she's the chosen. She is the one, you know, true protector of the world, ensuring that Urzkartaga never actually emerges into the general sphere of existence and actually starts going throughout the rest of the world. And so because of this, you know, Wonder Woman, along with the rest of these young girls or the rest of these women here, are able to destroy the physical body of Urzkartaga and confine him to this small little plant. In addition to this, because of the fact that Urzkartaga has basically been defeated, Barbara Ann Minerva is freed of her curse as Cheetah, and she actually goes back to her human form. And so this is really, you know, Greg Rucka coming along and saying, okay guys, here's the new status quo. Here's everything that you knew about Wonder Woman up to this point, her relationship with Cheetah in terms of how they related to one another. Now, the slate's been wiped clean. Now we're effectively starting all over again. We're starting from zero. This is going to be this kind of coming together of Wonder Woman and Steve Trevor. This is going to be Barbara Ann Minerva back to her human form. It's really beautiful in the way that this is done, because it's essentially just one giant retcon that doesn't quite feel like a retcon. It just feels like a naturally evolving story that just kind of led us up to this point. And again, you know, it's extremely cool the way this comes together. And so, you know, picking up in a fashion center in Arlington, Virginia, sometime after these events, we have Wonder Woman, and we have Etta Candy, and we have Barbara Minerva. Now, Barbara is trying to get back to being a normal human being. She's trying to get used to her life, wearing clothes, not having a bloodlust for human flesh, you know, different things like that. But the other half of this is that because this is Wonder Woman, you know, this is Greg Rucka bringing us back down to earth, saying, hey guys, we've been in the jungle all this time. You know, we've been with Wonder Woman and just Cheetah all this time, and they've been fighting foes. Don't forget, Wonder Woman is a world-renowned hero. Everyone in the world knows who she is. And this happens when basically the mall, when people become aware of the fact that Wonder Woman's there, and the mall just becomes packed with people, all of whom want her picture or they want an autograph. They treat her like a celebrity. And And again, this is really Greg Rucka bringing us back. This is Greg Rucka reminding us where Wonder Woman stands in the world, to say that yes, she's a hero. Yes, she's someone who's celebrated. Now from here, we switch over to the picket at Kirby Road. Now, the picket at Kirby Road is essentially this field office, this command center that exists underground. And so it's really a scenario where Etta Candy and her forces are able to operate clandestine operations, or able to control clandestine operations without people really knowing what it is that they're doing. Now, the other half of this, though, is we have Barbara Minerva currently working on trying to find Themyscira, but then we have Wonder Woman going on a date with Steve Trevor. And again, this is really just Greg Rucka setting everything right with the world. This is him saying, hey guys, look, Wonder Woman and Steve Trevor are back together now. The Wonder Woman that you love is here. The Steve Trevor that you remembered and loved the most is here as well. Not only that, yeah, sure, she dated the New 52 Superman, but he's dead now, which means that she's on the rebound. Wonder Woman is on the rebound, guys, which means, and of course, Steve Trevor's like, hey man, I mean, look, if Wonder Woman's on the rebound, like, I'm not gonna pass up a good opportunity. So of course he makes the moves, gets in there, and he gets some lip action, which is pretty awesome. So we essentially have the two of them getting together now. We have Steve Trevor and we have Wonder Woman as a couple. Now, if I'm gonna be honest with you guys, I always felt like this should have been the case. I felt like Wonder Woman and Superman was too easy. It was just too easy of a situation. It's like the perfect relationship. They can both fly, they both have super strength, they can both beat virtually anybody. And so it's like, well, I mean, what complication can there be? You can't really do any development with their characters because they're like two perfect people who start dating. Like, I don't know about you guys, but I want to see some fighting. Like, I want to see some bickering. I want to see Superman being like, Wonder Woman, where do you want to go for dinner tonight? And she's like, I don't know. And every option he gives her, she's like, that doesn't sound good. Like, that's the Wonder Woman that I want to see. And with Steve Trevor getting together with her, it injects humanity into a relationship that would have otherwise been perfect and really like a relationship of gods. And so it's great that we get this really cool combination. Now from here, we also have, Barbara Minerva talking to Wonder Woman, or at least talking to Etta Candy and Wonder Woman in terms of how Themyscira exists. What she says is Wonder Woman's always been able to just transition to Themyscira because she always just knew where it was. Like, she just inherently knew how to get there. Now this is Greg Rucka saying that Themyscira as it exists is essentially a pocket dimension. Now for those of you guys who don't know, in the realm of comic books, the pocket dimensions are essentially like small dimensions inside of an existing universe. And so it's like a closet in your house. Now the idea here is to, or at least to have Themyscira operate in a way to where there was always like some kind of dimensional barrier that Wonder Woman was just able to transition without ever having thought about it, doing it with the greatest of ease. And because of this, it was a situation where she just would go there, and nobody would ever really ask questions on how she got there. The problem with this was that it seemed like there were gatekeepers, and the gatekeepers weren't really physical so much as it was the gods saying, hey, here is where Themyscira is, so that she always knew where it was. The problem is that she forgot, which means the gods seem to have stepped in and took away her ability to access it. Now, eventually she is able to locate Themyscira with the help of Barbara Minerva. But when she gets in there, the Themyscira that we see is vastly different from the Themyscira that we'd seen in years past. This is not exactly the same. Things have changed. It seems a little bit darker. It seems a little less heavenly in terms of how it functions. Now, in the eyes of Wonder Woman, she's at home. I mean, she's like, yeah, I'm at home. Like, I'm in Themyscira. Yeah, here's my mom, and here's my friends, and the people that I knew, and the warrior sisters I've always had. And she doesn't question anything. But Steve Trevor immediately looks around and says, this isn't right. Like, something here is not right. This is wrong. Now, the first key thing that we get here is that Hippolyta, at least I think that's how you pronounce her name, has blonde hair. That was never the case before in DC Comics when it came to her character. That was one of the first things to me to indicate this is not Themyscira. Now, the truth is so much cooler than this. So Steve Trevor initially takes off and says, hey, look, I'm just gonna go do some poking around. Like, I'm gonna go do some looking around. Now, he eventually comes across, one of the other Amazonians or Amazons that, initially corners him and says, hey, look, we don't really want you here. You're only here because Wonder Woman wants you to be here, but we could just kind of force her hand and we could just kill you, so watch where you go, tread lightly, do not disrespect our lands. At the same time, Steve Trevor also says, hey, look, I'm looking for Castalia, I'm looking for the priestess in Themyscira. And this woman replies, I have no idea who you're talking about. Now, this is important because Steve Trevor's met her before. Steve Trevor knows of her. Now, when Wonder Woman finally shows up, he says, hey, look, this isn't right. This is not Themyscira, or if it is, something's wrong. Something's, this is not the way things are supposed to be. Not only that, the bracelet of Wonder Woman begins to hurt her, and when they remove it, they find actually, two small slits or two holes in her arm. Now, the funny thing about this is, she looks around and she says, this is not the Themyscira I remember. Like, where we had flowers and we had lush lands, this is barren, this is rock, this is dry. I don't understand, like, what in the heck is going on? And then finally it snaps in. finally the truth comes to fruition with Wonder Woman. And she comes to the realization that of all the journeys that she's ever had, and this is the kicker, this is what's crazy. Of all the journeys she's ever had to Themyscira, she had never actually been to her true home. Now, what the indication seems to be here from Greg Rucka is that from the time Wonder Woman first left Themyscira, up until this current moment right now, whenever she went back to Themyscira, it was never actually her home. She was just going someplace else. What that place was, we don't know, but she's never been back to Themyscira, not one time since she first left in DC Comics. Now, I don't know about you guys, but this was mind-blowing. I was like, holy shit, Greg Rucka, man. Like, this is why I say he's doing such an amazing job with this story. But we're gonna wrap this up. This is the end of the lies. It is, oh my God. This was like a roller coaster of emotions, guys. I'm gonna be honest. But if you guys are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the like button to become part of the Rob Corps, or the subscribe button rather to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, drop a like and leave a comment down below. Let me know what you guys think about this, because again, I gotta tell you, this is some of the best Wonder Woman storytelling that I've ever seen. And yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.